My name is Lily, and I live in Austin, Texas. I'm 27 years old, and my life hasn't exactly been the fairy tale I once dreamed it would be. Growing up, I was the kind of girl who believed in love stories, the ones where the husband is kind, protective, and always on your side. But life had other plans for me, and those plans came with their fair share of heartbreak. I met Charles 5 years ago. He was charming, confident, and seemed like everything I had ever wanted. When we got married, I thought I was stepping into a partnership where I would be cherished and respected. But the reality was far from that. Charles was distant, dismissive, and as I later realized, entirely blind to the toxicity his sister Zoe brought into my life. Zoe hated me from the moment we met. She didn't even try to hide it. She always found ways to undermine me, whether it was a snide comment about my looks, passive-aggressive remarks about how lucky I was to marry her brother, or outright attempts to make me feel like I didn't belong. She saw me as an outsider, someone unworthy of the family she claimed to hold so dear. The worst part wasn't Zoe, though, it was Charles. He never stood up for me. Every time I tried to talk to him about how she treated me, he'd wave it off, saying things like, "That's just how Zoe is," or worse, "You're reading too much into it." I felt invisible in my own marriage, like my voice didn't matter. For years, I endured this dynamic. I tried to keep the peace, to avoid making waves, to show Charles I wasn't the jealous, petty woman Zoe made me out to be. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. One day, everything came to a head. It started like any other day, or at least I thought it would. Charles was at work, and I was home cleaning up, trying to get the house in order. I remember feeling a little off that morning, like there was a storm brewing. Call it intuition or whatever you like, but something in me just felt uneasy. Zoe had been over the day before. She'd come by unannounced, as usual, treating our home like her personal hangout spot. She breezed in with that fake smile of hers, glancing around like she was judging every corner of my house. I tried to be polite, but the tension between us was always there, lurking beneath the surface. She stayed for hours, talking mostly about herself and her latest successes, dropping hints about how she had better taste in clothes and how she could never live in a cramped house like mine. I didn't think much of it at the time. Zoe had always been like that, condescending, rude, and smug. But the next day, as I was tidying up, I noticed something strange. The drawer where I kept my jewelry was slightly open. At first, I thought maybe I'd left it that way by accident, but when I checked inside, my stomach dropped. My favorite earrings were gone, simple gold ones that Charles had given me on our first anniversary. I kept searching and realized more things were missing. A bracelet my mom had given me, a necklace, and even some cash I'd stashed in the same drawer. I tried to stay calm, but as I kept looking, I realized the missing items didn't stop there. In the closet, a new dress I had just bought, one I hadn't even worn yet, was gone too. My mind was racing, and all the pieces started coming together. Zoe, she was the only one who had been here, the only one who'd had access to my things. When Charles came home that evening, I tried to approach the subject carefully. I waited until after dinner, hoping to have a calm, reasonable conversation. "Charles," I said, "I need to talk to you about something. I think Zoe stole from me." I'll never forget the look on his face. At first, he seemed confused, like he couldn't even process what I was saying. But then his expression changed. Anger, disbelief, and something else I couldn't quite place. "What are you talking about?" he snapped. "Why would Zoe steal from you? She doesn't need your stuff." I tried to explain, to walk him through everything I had found, or rather, hadn't found, but he wouldn't even listen. He cut me off mid-sentence, his voice rising with every word. "How dare you accuse her like this? You're always jealous of her, always trying to find something to blame her for. She works hard, she earns her own money. Why the hell would she want your cheap jewelry or your stupid dress?" His words hit me like a slap. Cheap jewelry, stupid dress. As if the things that were stolen didn't matter just because they weren't expensive. As if my feelings didn't matter. I tried to stay calm, to reason with him, but he was relentless. "You know what your problem is?" he shouted. "You can't stand Zoe because she's better than you. That's what this is about. You're petty and insecure, and honestly, I'm sick of it." By then, I was in tears. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I married, the man who was supposed to love and protect me, was tearing me apart over his sister, the same sister who had done nothing but treat me like dirt. I stood there, stunned and shaking, as he delivered the final blow. If you're going to keep accusing my family of this nonsense, maybe you shouldn't be here at all. I think you should leave. I froze. What? I whispered, barely able to get the word out. You heard me, he said coldly. Pack your things and go. I'm done with this. And just like that, my world came crashing down. I packed a bag that night, still reeling from what had happened, and left the home I had built with Charles. As I walked out the door, I glanced back one last time, hoping he might stop me, might realize what he was doing. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching me leave, his face hard and unyielding. It had been a year since Charles kicked me out. At first, I was lost, devastated, and struggling to figure out how to move forward. I stayed with a friend for a while, barely sleeping, barely eating, replaying that horrible night in my mind over and over again. How could the man I married, the man I thought loved me, choose his toxic, selfish sister over me? But life has a funny way of forcing you to adapt. Slowly, I started picking up the pieces. I found a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I got a new job, threw myself into work, and started building a life that didn't revolve around pleasing someone who didn't appreciate me. It wasn't easy, but every little step forward felt like a small victory. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about Charles and Zoe through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, everything was just fine, at least on the surface. Zoe was still her overconfident, smug self, flaunting her supposed successes, and Charles was still her biggest cheerleader. I tried not to think about them, but sometimes the bitterness crept in. I wondered if they ever thought about what they did to me, if they ever regretted it. Then, one day, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was Charles. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. I wasn't sure why he was calling, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello, I said cautiously. His voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. Lily, I need your help. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same man who had thrown me out of our home, who had called me jealous and insecure, who had chosen his sister over me without a second thought. And now he was asking for my help. Why are you calling me, Charles? I asked, my tone colder than I expected. He let out a heavy sigh, and then the whole story spilled out. Zoe had sold the house. The same house he had kicked me out of. She had taken all the money and disappeared without a word. He had no idea where she was, and now he was drowning in debt, facing loan payments he couldn't handle on his own. I have nowhere to go, he said, his voice breaking. I don't know what to do. For a moment, I was speechless. The audacity of it all. After everything he had put me through, after all the pain and humiliation, he had the nerve to come crawling back to me because his precious sister had betrayed him. I'm sorry you're going through this, I said finally, my voice steady. But I don't see how this has anything to do with me. Please, Lily, he begged. I made a mistake. I see that now. I should have listened to you. I should have stood up for you. I was wrong about Zoe, about everything. Just, please. I need a place to stay, just for a little while. I promise I'll make it up to you. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, years of suppressed frustration rising to the surface. Charles, I said, my voice firm, you didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed us. You chose your sister over your wife, you humiliated me, and you kicked me out of my own home. And now that she's done to you what she's been doing to me all along, you want me to save you. No. Lily, please, he said again, but I cut him off. No, I repeated. You made your choice, Charles. You chose her. So go find her. Maybe she'll let you sleep on her couch. Oh wait, that's right. She took everything from you, just like she tried to take everything from me. You're on your own now, and you have no one to blame but yourself. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally he whispered, I deserve this, don't I? I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if he was looking for sympathy or absolution, but I didn't have any left to give. You do, I said simply. And I hope you use this time to reflect on what you've done. But don't call me again, Charles. I'm done. Before he could say another word, I hung up the phone. Then I blocked his number. I sat there for a long time afterward, my heart racing. Part of me felt angry, even sad, but another part of me felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, freedom. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe Charles anything, not my time, not my energy, and certainly not my forgiveness. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. When I hung up the phone after Charles begged for my help, I thought that was the end of it, but a few days later, he showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting him, and honestly, seeing his face after all that time made my stomach twist. He looked terrible, disheveled, thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. A far cry from the arrogant, self-assured man who had tossed me aside like I meant nothing. Lily, he started, his voice soft, almost pleading, please, just hear me out. I folded my arms across my chest, leaning against the doorframe. You have 5 minutes, I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. He launched into the same story he told me on the phone. How Zoe had betrayed him. How she'd sold the house, drained their joint accounts, and disappeared without so much as a goodbye. He admitted he was broke, drowning in debt, and desperate for a place to stay. I know I don't deserve your kindness, he said, his voice cracking, but I have no one else to turn to. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a brief moment I saw a glimmer of the man I used to love. The man I thought he was when we got married. But that glimmer wasn't enough to erase everything he had done to me. The betrayal, the humiliation, the pain of being discarded so easily, all of it came flooding back, and with it came a clarity I hadn't had before. Do you even hear yourself? I said, my voice rising. You stood there a year ago and accused me of being jealous, of being petty, of making up lies about your sister. You called my things worthless, and then you threw me out like I was nothing. And now, because she did to you what I tried to warn you about, you think you can just waltz back into my life and expect me to fix everything for you. Lily, I know I was wrong, he said, his eyes pleading. I was blind, and I didn't see what Zoe really was. But I've learned my lesson. Please, I'm begging you. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness, but from anger, from the sheer audacity of him showing up here, asking for my help. You don't get to beg me, I said firmly. You don't get to come back into my life after destroying it and expect me to save you. You chose her over me, Charles. You chose her. So go to her. Oh wait, you can't, because she kicked you out, didn't she? Just like you kicked me out. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. You know what? I'm glad this happened to you. I'm glad karma finally caught up with you. You deserve every bit of this. But I am done being your safety net. You're not my problem anymore. I stepped back, ripping the door as I prepared to shut it. Go live with Zoe, I said, my voice cold. She's better than me, right? Isn't that what you said? Well, let her deal with you now. Goodbye, Charles. And with that, I slammed the door in his face. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. For the first time, I wasn't the one being pushed aside, silenced, or blamed. I had stood up for myself, and it felt good. No, it felt amazing.